Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Com Zambia PLC's first Investor Day webinar. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join in. Whether you're a shareholder, potential investor, or you're just interested in what's going on with Com Zambia, you're in the right place, and we hope to make this session worth your time. My name is Chisanga Shikoki. I am the moderator for today's webinar, and I'm very pleased to be joined by members of the executive team who I will introduce very shortly. But once again, yes, just thank you for joining in. As you know, this is our Investor Day webinar. So basically, it's all about Com Zambia, as we have said in all of our communications leading up to this. It's all about Com Zambia opening our doors to the public, to shareholders, potential investors, and just everyone who's interested. This is Com Zambia welcoming you in. And the whole point of this session is to give you an outlook, both of our 2025 performance, which was a historic year in the company, and we will get into that. And as well, just give you a strategic outlook. What is the company trying to do? What direction is the company heading in? So I'm very pleased to be joined by Mr. Chavala Kaunda, the chairman of the Com Zambia board, Ms. Yabe Shitima, Manager of Communications and Investor Relations, Ms. Chilufya Kangwa, the Chief Financial and Operations Officer, and Mr. Maono Campbell, the Chief Executive Officer. Before I go any further, I'd like to welcome Mr. Chavala Kaunda to just give some welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great that you could all join us. To you, our shareholders, some of you who are joining us from the very beginning, and those of you who are exploring Com Zambia PLC for the first time, welcome. We are glad you're here. This Investor Day holds a very special significance to us. It is not just a presentation of results. It is a moment for us to engage with you and account for the trust you have placed in this company. That trust is something which the board does not take lightly. When I reflect on the journey of Com Zambia, what strikes me most is not any single milestone, but the consistency of character this company has shown, disciplined in how it operates, deliberate in how it grows, and deeply committed to creating something of lasting value for Zambia and for its shareholders. 2025 was, by any measure, a landmark and a great year for us. But I want to be clear, the numbers which will be presented later are not a result of luck or favorable timing. They're a result of years of painstaking work, building the right team, making the right decisions, and staying true to a vision where others may have wavered. Our IPO on the Luce alternative market last December was historic, and we continue to take pride in that, not simply because it was a first, but because of who it brought in. You ordinary Zambians, retail investors, people who believed in a locally built, locally led technology company. That is who we are accountable to, and it is who drives us. The board's role is to ensure that the leadership of this company, our MD, our Chief Financial Operating Officer, and the entire executive team has the governance, the oversight, and the freedom to do their best work. I am proud to say that the board is confident in that team and even more confident in the direction the company is headed. You will hear more from the MD and the CFO shortly as they take you through the details, the performance, the balance sheet, the outlook for 2026, and what we believe lies ahead. What I want to leave you with as we begin is this. Com Zambia PLC enters this new chapter as a company that has earned its place on the market, in the industry, and in the lives of its customers. We are not resting on that. We are building on it. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the confidence in us. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you for that, Mr. Kaunda. Yes, so um, like our board chairperson has said, this is supposed to be an engaging session, an interactive session. We welcome you to share whatever questions you may have as the presentations go on, as this session goes on. There is a Q&A box. You can submit your questions through there. For some of you who may have tuned in for our earlier sessions, we had similar to this during the IPO period around November to December. You will be familiar with the format of this. We will be presenting, like Mr. Kaunda said, we'll be presenting results as well as the strategic outlook. But it's not just about the presenters here speaking. We do want to engage with you, the shareholders, the investors, the interested parties, and that's why we want this to be engaging. Please feel free to share whatever questions you may have through the text box. And I'll also just like to direct you, when you have the time, to go to the .com Zambia website at www.comzambia.com. You will find the company's annual report and audited financial statements there. Once you got the website, there is a news section, an investor relations section. You will find the annual report there, and we encourage you to please take time to review it, to read through it, and just learn more about the company's results. And like I've suggested, the company's strategic outlook. I will now invite the founder and managing director, Mr. CEO, Moano Campbell. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tisangre, and I think good afternoon to everyone. We do not take it lightly that a number of you, and I'm seeing the numbers that have logged in, and we do not take it lightly that many of you took time out of your schedule today to come be with us. So really my role is just to officially continue the words of welcome established by our chairman of the board, Mr. Kaunda. And I think as he was speaking, he talked about the journey and how long it's been. I know Mr. Kaunda has been involved with the company for more than 12 years now. I met him very early, a number of years back. This was back in 2013. And I think from the value in speaking with him, and that philosophy of, if you want to go far, go with the people that have been there. And I remember when I first met him, that was quickly what established our relationship, and he became a formal advisor to the company. And I think he's seen it grow from sort of this small vision of, this is what we would like to do in the landscape as a technology company, through our evolution, going from an e-commerce company to 2015, where we raised money from venture capital investors like Kukula Capital and eVentures Africa Fund, sort of the journey that followed thereafter, with growing the company, scaling the company, getting it investor ready to the IPO and to the moment where we are now. So again, Mr. Kaunda, I commend you for that, and I thank you for being on this journey with me and with the company, and to continue to lead this organization as our chairman of the board, and the support that you and the other board of directors do give. And I think, as Chisanga quite rightly said, Investor Day is always about you, the participants. Whether you are an existing shareholder with us, you're a potential investor, you're just curious, this is us opening up our doors to you, sharing our results with you. I know our annual report has been published, and many of you could look through that, but this is a chance for you to ask those questions. And I think we say this because sometimes we have an AGM next week, and the AGM is shareholder only. But at the AGM, a lot of that is very procedural. And I think really an Investor Day is the chance for you to ask the questions to the executives. Certainly, if you want to ask Mr. Kaunda and other board members, a lot of that will happen at the AGM. So I think I would just set up that context. Sorry, Tsang, I know you sort of brought me on the spot here, which is why I'm sort of thinking on the spot outside of my prepared remarks. But with that being said, obviously my role today, and I think just perhaps for people to sort of understand what the structure of .com Zambia is and the leadership structure is, I'm fortunate enough to be the managing director, and a lot of my role now is on the strategic outlook of the company. What are we thinking about in the future? Where do we want to go strategically? once that is established, and it's established alongside the board of directors, the next question comes down to how do we implement? And implementation is really where we rely on the leadership of Chilufya Kangwa, who's our Chief Financial and Operating Officers, and other members of the leadership team, whether you're the head of, it's the head of IT, it's the head of customer experience, and a number of others. And that's really, for me, for any entrepreneur, what you're now hearing is what we call the institutionalization of a company. Yes, you start small, but as you grow, things begin to change. And as you become public, things begin to change even more. The expectations grow. And I think the key words that we always sort of apply to sort of where we are now is things around governance and accountability to all of you, and the question of how do we create value for you, the shareholders. And I think that is what you will, that's what really what you're here, you have logged on to here today. You know, what have we done? And how are we going to, and where do we go from here? And I think those will be the two questions that will be addressed very shortly, because I think we want to really make it an investor day. And I think we're going to leave a lot of room for Q&A to be able to address that. And so with that being said, I will come back and sort of address our future outlook. But I think to know where you are going, you need a bit of a recap of sort of where have we been the past one year. So Sanga, back to you.
Thank you for that, Mono. And yes, I think Mono and Mr. Kaunda have set the stage very well. I like what Mono said there. To know where you're going, you must know where you're coming from. And I think one thing I will also just highlight that Mr. Kaunda said is the results that we're about to present to you didn't happen by chance. These have been years in the making through a lot of hard work and dedication. And now I will introduce the Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Ms. Chilufya Kangwa, to introduce herself and also just speak more to these results and present on that.
Right, thanks for that, Sanga. And good afternoon, everyone. And just like the CEO had mentioned, thank you for taking time outside your busy schedule and to join us. So, right, we're just going to try and get into this. Sanga, could you just confirm that the team can see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm just going to deep dive into this. Okay, so very quickly, my full names are Chilufya Kangwa, and I'm the Chief Financial and Operations Officer here at Com Zambia PLC. And I will be taking you through our performance for the financial year 2025. And just like the CEO had mentioned, he will then come in and talk towards our strategy and outlook for 2026. But before I deep dive into the numbers, let me give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do for your context, and also for the benefit of those that are joining us for the first time. Com Zambia is a leading Zambian technology company that develops innovative digital solutions to transform service delivery and revenue collection. We specialize in revenue collection systems, digital payments, and business intelligence for both public and private sector clients. Our flagship product right now is our e-toll road system. Beyond tolling, our portfolio also includes e-levy for digital tax collection. So in short, if a Zambian motorist passes through a toll gate electronically, or when a municipality collects a levy digitally, there's a very good chance that Com Zambia's technology is powering that process. All right, and so in December of last year, we did become the first company to list on the Lusaka Securities Exchange alternative market, whilst raising capital directly from ordinary Zambians. Many of you are actually in this room with us, and you've now become part of the founding shareholders group, and we're delighted to have you here today. So very quickly, we're going to move into our numbers. Hold on, technology. All right, and so in front of us is just a glance of our financial performance for 2025. Our revenue, as you can see there, top line came through at 666 million, and this is 26% higher than our 2024 revenue. Looking at our EBITDA as well, we were able to post about 10.6 million. So operationally, we are profitable. and our profit before tax coming in at 9.2 million kwacha, 70% higher than our 2024 numbers. We were able to close the year cash healthy, mostly due to the IPO. So our cash balance came through at 17.9 million. And during the financial year, we did pay out a dividend of 5.42 million kwacha. Our total debt on the balance sheet is actually nil. So this business has now been fully funded by equity. Looking at our cumulative growth over the 8 years, just looking at 2018 all the way to 2025, you will start to see that our revenue really took a huge jump between 2023 and 2024. And 2024, that momentum continues into 2025. So from 529 in revenue to 666, mostly driven by our e-tolling business. A quick look at our financial performance, the P&L, as of 31st December 2025 versus 2024. So revenue comes in 26% higher in 2025 against 2024. Our gross profit, we were able to deliver 24.1 against 18.6 million. It is also important to note that being a tech company, it is very common for us to be high volume and low margins. Our EBITDA coming through at 10.6, higher than the prior year of 6.6 million. Our profit before tax coming in at 9.2 versus 5.4. Profit after tax at 6.8 against 3.5. And looking at our cash balance, we've closed at 17.9, whereas in 2024, we start with 2.7 million. Dividends paid in 2024 were 900,000, and in 2025, we sit at 5.4. We've been debt-free from 2024 into 2025. A quick glance at our balance sheet figures as well. Our fixed assets in 2024 were about 806, whereas in 2025, we posted about 1.1 million, mostly driven by our intangible assets and also our computer equipment as well. The drop in the intangible assets, for those that are curious, because you start to see that this is a tech company in 2024, and in 2025, you do see that drop to about 445, mostly driven by amortization on our intangible asset on the software. Hence, the reason to now expand into different products and also to now start developing new softwares and digital platforms. And hence some of the IPO funds are going to be focused into expansion of providing these solutions. A lot of that is going to go into investment into our systems. And our expectation during the outlook, and I do believe that the MD is going to speak to this, is that the IPO funds will be funded into strengthening the balance sheet and our systems, and we start to monitor our intangible assets as well. So our total non-current assets, 1.5 against 1.9. We are a tech company, so you do not expect us to be very heavy on the fixed assets as well. Our trade and other receivables from 2024 to 2025 moved from 14.7 to 9.4, reflecting improved collection mechanisms as well as better management of our customers. Our cash and bank balances mostly impacted by our IPO performance. We do see that 17 million coming in. This line, which we're calling amounts due from related parties, though not significant in value, but significant by nature, refers to an investment that we're making in BookPay Zambia Limited, which is something that's going to be coming through and a project that we're very excited about. So this is going to speak towards the payment side of our business as well. As of 2025, there is no tax recoverable number. So our total assets actually grew from 17.5 million in 2024 to 27.38 in 2025. That's the total current assets, and our total assets 9.4 to 28.9, mostly driven by the cash balance. So it is notable that we did end the year very cash positive and quite strong. Looking at our liabilities, we moved from a share capital position of about 8.2 to about 10 million. And then in 2025, we did have a reorganization of our equity. And so you start to see the share premium at 10.8 and our treasury shares, which basically represents our ESOP portion at 50,497. Our reserves coming through at positive 376. And so this is cumulative for all financial years of existence. Our total equity then grows from 8.1 to 21, mostly driven by the IPO. We do have a deferred tax liability that has dropped to about 170K. And when we look at our total current liabilities, we move from 9.8 to about 7.6, mostly driven by good cash management as we balance growth and paying off our liabilities. So our total equity and liability is also coming through at 19.4 against 28.9. So to put the balance sheet figures into perspective, our working capital ratio actually sits at 3.59. That's very positive against 1.79 in 2024. Our debt to equity ratio is actually at 0 due to the fact that we do not sit with any debt. Our total equity coming in at 21.2 from 8.1 last year, driven by the IPO and the improvement in the cash balance as well, driven by the IPO. When we look at the graph at the bottom left, which is our total assets versus our equity, what we looked like in 2024 is 19 against an equity of 8. And in 2025, we still maintain a higher value of total assets against equity, but we have seen the growth that is proportional. And that's because the cash balance that sits in the assets and the IPO equity that was injected also coming through to balance off our equity numbers. When we look at our cash balance versus current liabilities, in 2024, our cash balance was sitting just under 3 million versus liabilities sitting under 10 million. As of 2025, we have changed this position for the business where we're sitting with a cash balance close to about 18 million as our liabilities are now under 8 million. So this indicates a very strong balance sheet position and also a very healthy position for the business. Just some IPO milestones. Obviously, we were the first company on LUSE, alternative market. We were looking for subscription. We were oversubscribed on our IPO by 114%. 100% of the investors are retailers. And this introduced into our business over 530 individual shareholders coming through. Moving on to revenue guidance. What are we looking for? We're looking forward to, in 2026, to hit numbers close to 850 and 950 in our revenue. And the question is, where is this performance target going to come from? So very quickly, we have a tariff uplift in 2026. We have noted that the national budget has introduced a toll fee increase of 30 to 33% across the commercial vehicle categories. Understanding that Com Zambia already has existing clients, this upward adjustment trickles into the business without us having to do anything on day one. And so based on that tariff uplift, we are looking at an increment in our revenue. Number two, we also have client growth. So expanded sales team. We've expanded our sales team. We've got greater public visibility as a listed company right now. And also we've got the funding that allows us to go out there and work towards expanding our client growth. There's also new concessions that are coming on board. For those that have been following very closely, the Kaweto Plaza, which is in Central Province, is expected to open in Q2 2026. This will be a game changer as it is not a plaza that was existing in 2025. So already 2026 does get that upper hand. We're also going to introduce new products, but I will leave this for the MD to come through and speak on it. So 2 new product initiatives in development that will be coming through in the year, and we're very excited about what this means and what we're going to be able to do with them. And so really and truly, that is the financial performance of Com Zambia. The best is ahead of us, and we enter 2026 profitable, disciplined, as a public listed company, debt-free, cash strong, and growing. That will be the end of my slide. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chilufya. Well presented, and I think it's safe to say there's a lot of green in the numbers that Chilufya has just presented. So like we keep emphasizing, this is an interactive session. So please, I can see some questions already coming through. Please keep sending through your questions. We'll address them, whether we'll address them during the presentations or afterwards. Please just keep sending them through. We will address them. So Chilufya, I'll bring you back just for this one question, which I know you did touch on, but maybe you can just quickly go over it again.
Maybe just before we jump to the questions, Chilufya, can you put up your slides again? More importantly, just 2 slides. I really feel like I need to just add maybe 1 or 2 comments to some of the things that you've said. And then we can also perhaps, if there's some questions just around the financial performance, we can address 1 or 2 before I formally jump on. So Chilufya, maybe if you can just get up the income statement slide. And I want to provide some context to perhaps, to the participants in the room as to, I think, for me personally, why I think this performance is actually quite powerful. And let's begin first and foremost, just right there with the financial performance, any one of the financial performance slides. And I think the comment that I would make is, Mr. Chabs, I'm not going to put you on the spot here, Mr. Chablak. I'm not going to put you on the spot here. But I do recall that when we were thinking, going public is not something that you do overnight. It's not a decision you make on a whim. For us, becoming a public company was something that had been decided a while back from when we actually did do it. The question was always, when were we going to go public? And actually, a lot of the planning was that we were going to go public in 2026 after the election. That was actually what we communicated to the stock exchange. And it was through conversations with the stock exchange where we were speaking, they were looking at our books, at our governance readiness, and they were like, but your company's ready to go now. Why don't you just go public this year? And we did. We ultimately, we made the decision. That was around August, September. And by November, we went public. And I think that is important from one perspective. One, just the context of the dividend that was paid, the 5.4 million. That was a dividend that was actually paid in June before we knew we were going public. But why did we do it? Because we knew we were going public, one of the things that we wanted to very quickly establish was that we were a well-run, profitable company that was actually giving value back to its shareholders through dividends. And what we wanted to do was, over the years, we wanted to start documenting that process, that history. And so we did do that. And what you have to remember, and I think what makes the numbers more impressive, is we paid out 5.4 million in dividend. We did the IPO, and when we look at the IPO breakdown, which I think is done in the annual report, there are what I would call about 4 million in extraordinary expenses because of us doing the IPO. Some of it was attributed to the cost of the actual IPO itself, what you pay your advisors, what you pay regulators. Other part was the marketing component. We needed to be visible. The other component was what we did with our employees. In the annual report, we do disclose that we gave employees of the company 860,000 kwachas worth of shares. That's an expense to the company. The other thing that we did in December was, hey, look, we had a great year. How do you have a great year, not turn around and, give your employees recognition? And that was something that we effectively did. So think about the optics here. We paid out 5.4 million in cash. We spent about another 4 million in expenditure. Without that, one of the projections we gave last year was that we were going to do 15 million kwacha in profit. That's where that profit before tax number in some of the prospectus material you saw actually did. But we did all of that, and we still finished with a cash balance of 18 million, about 18 million kwacha. That is the context. And during the IPO, I remember I would mention quite a bit that part of the reason we went public was not to raise money per se, because we knew we were already profitable, but everything that going public would allow us to do, the credibility, inviting all of you to be stakeholders in our company, to bring some of our clients to be shareholders with us and help us do product development, to give us the governance structures to say to the world that we can do it. And what you will learn that, if going public was easy, a lot of companies would have done it already. And I think that's really a testament to sort of where the numbers are coming from. But more importantly, going through the IPO has put us in a position of strength in every sense of the word. Now that we are public, some of the phone calls that I get, people that were not taking my calls prior, now they do. And a lot of that is just the respect of being a public entity. And I think, as Chilufya alluded to, that puts us in a very exciting position. And if we just go to the balance sheet, there's probably just one or two other things I'd like to highlight, because at the end of the day, this is about being able to not only, it's to be able to articulate to you, our investors or potential investors, how this company is run and what drives some of the numbers. So just a couple of things that I would like to highlight. The property, plant and equipment, that's about 1.1 million. I'll give you a breakdown of what that 1.1 million stands for. It's actually all of our office equipment, and it's about 5 vehicles. If anyone knows the cost of a showroom vehicle, they would know that the property, plant, and equipment, that number means that, you know, we're keeping our spending relatively modest. And I remember one of the conversations that I've had to our staff is, you know, in terms of setting the expectation, is that we've been given these IPO funds to grow the company, a public trust. That is where our focus will be. If we pull it off, then perhaps we can have nicer things in terms of our property, plant, and equipment. But by no means of the imagination are we saying that we've got, you know, we're just, I think what we're trying to say is that we're not driving showroom vehicles here. Maybe that will come down the road when we've created value for you, because that is what has to come first. And I thought that's just an important number to pull out, because part of how our philosophy is to continue to be lean and efficient, not unfair, but how do we be lean and not be extravagant? The other number that I will pull out is just the trade and other receivables. How we've gone from 14 million to 9.4 million. I think some parties may look at that and say, hey, they have debts of 9.4 million. But I think what we have to explain there is 9.4 million represent all the invoices that were open at the end of the year. And to understand that is we have to explain that we run what's called an enterprise back office. So when we talk about how we have over 300 corporate clients, that is effectively what we have. It's Zambeef, it's ShopRite, it is Trade Kings, all of those parties that I am naming, and I could go on and on and on. Miloto Transport, I think Roxy Trucking, they're in our annual report. All of those are clients, but these are enterprise clients. So the way in which you bill an enterprise client is you say to them, they say to us, hey, look, we would like to add more money to our toll account that you are managing for us. Com Zambia, you are managing our toll account. Now, some of these transactions are quite large. You know, it could be 200,000 kwacha, 500,000 kwacha, 800,000 kwacha, depending on the size of the account. And the way a back office billing system works is you don't just get up and say, your account is low, top up. There are processes to follow, agreements that we have to follow, timing as well. Sometimes it's knowing that, look, a company has this much in their balance. In 14 days, their balance will be zero. They have to top up. But to do that, we have to raise an invoice. We have to send that invoice to their accounting department. There has to be an agreed period of time before that invoice is paid. And so you basically go through that process. And so what happens is, when we look at the monthly amount that we are processing, I think right now it's about 65 to 70 million kwacha. All the trade receivables mean is that at the end of that day, on December 31st, 2025, this was the amount of invoices we had outstanding. And for those who are sort of into the financial numbers, that's when the question becomes, okay, what's the aging of that 9.4 million? How many is within 30 days? How many is late? How many is overdue? And then you sort of go from there. So I just thought those were two important contexts to add. I think when our financial numbers are being, when you're looking at our financial numbers, which everyone can do by either looking at the annual report or looking at the audited financials for the year. So let me just pause there. Just thought it was important to add that context. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you for that, Mono, just shedding some extra context to the numbers that we're looking at. And so like I was saying, we can see some questions are coming through. So I will bring our CFO, Ms. back to address a couple of questions that you've had before we go forward. So a couple that I've seen, and I think this would be a very popular one among the interested people. So does .com Zambia pay dividend, and what is the payout policy? Chilifya, maybe you can speak to that.
Right, thanks, Sanga. Historically, as you've seen from the slides, yes, .com Zambia has paid dividends. For the policy currently, we do have a policy that states that that's going to guide how dividends will be paid out. However, this has to be balanced in line with where we are in terms of expansion and where we are in terms of cash position. So the policy does exist, and I do believe the MD will speak towards that as we go on as well. So yes, dividends have been paid out in the past. The track record is there, but this future dividends are now going to be based on performance and cash balances. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chilifya. And I think just to piggyback of that, just so that the question is addressed, in the annual report, the board of directors did communicate the dividend policy. And part of that policy would be to say, look, we look at our net profit after tax, and we're aiming for 10 to 50% of that number. We always like to be better than the year prior. And I think that makes up aspects of the dividend policy. But as Chilufya alluded to, what the board of directors have also said is that they need to balance growth with the ability to pay dividends. So factors like what do we have in the pipeline will come into play. Factors like how much cash is available will also come into play. And what they've committed to is that they will always make a dividend decision twice a year. So the next decision will be at the end of Q3, which is the end of September. So they will make a decision around interim dividends then. And then they will also do it at the AGM as well. So twice a year, the board of directors, who actually are responsible for declaring a dividend and what that dividend will be, they have communicated in the annual report that is how they will approach dividends, but they will try and balance that with some of the growth prospects we have. And I think just to going on a tangent a little bit, we're very different from most sort of technology companies trying to grow. Unfortunately, we're the first in Zambia, so there's no other sort of technology company to refer to. But everyone knows notoriously that Amazon have been in operation for years and years and years, and they've actually never made a profit. WhatsApp was acquired by Meta, and they've never made a profit on WhatsApp. And sometimes with tech companies, if the focus is on growth, the measure becomes, are the numbers growing? And that tends to be on the focus. It tends to be the focus. But we're in a position where we are both profitable and we are seeking to try and grow. And part of the board's role going forward is how do they balance investors' expectation between the two aspects. And also, I think in the Zambian context, just from a personal observation perspective, because the stock market can be very illiquid, dividend has always been viewed as a way of getting your return on investment. I invested in this company. If they are profitable, they will pay a dividend back, and that is how I will recover my investment. So I think the board have all of that information at play, and ultimately they are the ones who make the final decision on if and when a dividend is declared. But I think they've been very transparent in indicating that that decision will always occur in September and in March.
Thank you for that, Mono. And yes, I think that will be a burning question among many people, so it is important to address it. And yes, so Mono and Chilifya have they've both referenced the annual report where you can find more information about this. And I will just redirect you again. You can find the annual report on the .com Zambia website at www.comzambia.com. Once you go to the website, the annual report is available whether you access the news page or the investor relations page. You'll be able to download it and review it for yourself there, and you can see more on the policies that have been spoken about. Just a couple of questions I've seen here about investing in .com and whether shares are still being sold. Yes, so .com Zambia is trading, or shares are trading on the Lusaka Securities Exchange. So please, you can contact a broker or download the Luce app if you're interested in purchasing shares, and then you can take it from there. I see someone asking how much they should invest. Unfortunately, we're not in the position to tell you that, so please speak to a financial advisor and contact your broker to decide how much you're able to invest once you do. Before we talk about strategy, I'll just bring our CFO back for one last question, which I know she did touch on in her presentation, but maybe you can just go over it pretty quickly. Sorry, question is just here. Yes, what is the breakdown of .com Zambia's revenue and how much of it is e-tolling? Chilufya, maybe you can speak to that again.
Right, thank you. So in our revenue, I did mention that we do have e-tolling and we do have our e-levy side as well. So if we're looking percentage-wise, e-tolling is about 99% of the business. This is our flagship product, and we are now streaming out into different products as well.
Thank you for that, Chilufya. I can see a lot of the questions are still coming in, and yes, please keep them coming. And I can see a lot of them are especially about .com Zambia and our strategy and our plans going forward. So before we address those questions, I will now invite back founder and managing director, Moana Campbell, to give his presentation on .com Zambia's strategy outlook.
Okay. Give me a moment to get my slides up. Okay. And then, Sanga, if you may just confirm.
Yep, we can see
that. Please confirm that you can see what's up on the screen.
Yes, we can see them.
Okay. All right. Great. No, again, thank you. Big thank you to everyone. Sorry, just sorry. Can you still see my screen up?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's just go from there. We can take it. And again, thank you to Chilufya. And I think as many of you heard, 2025 was a very strong year in our company history. And what I want to do now is tell you what we're going to do with that momentum and where we are taking this company. And it's interesting that, when I was preparing for this meeting, it sort of struck me that I could technically do this meeting in 30 seconds, because when it comes to explaining the strategic direction of the company, it's really two priorities for us. It's strengthening the foundation of the company and what I call growing with intention. And that's pretty much it. But certainly, I do want to put a little bit more color around, just sort of around that, and just talk about what this actually means in a little bit more, more detail. So, when we think about sort of the first strategy, which is what I call strengthening the foundation, I like to call this strategy taking care of home.
Hi, Moana.
Because
sorry,
for me,
so sorry to cut you off. Just so we can see clearly, could you please put it in presentation mode? We're seeing the whole.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. All right, great. Okay, can we see it now?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right. So the first part I always like to talk about is what I sort of call strengthening the foundation, or what I call taking care of home. And for me, that is basically divided into two categories. It's protecting and growing the e-toll business, and it's also building operational maturity across the company. So we have ambitions to grow, to go from the small company that we are now, which is why we are on the alternative exchange, to much larger. And I think that's what many of you as investors expect of us. But to be able to do that well, you do need to think about operationally how you are set up. And I think a lot of 2025, and I think one of the things that you might see in the annual report talks about the number of employees that we now have in the company. We've gone from about 12 employees last year in July. Now we're at 32. What does that mean? It means that we are scaling and we are growing, but it also means that we now need to start thinking about how we are effective as an organization. It's the systems that we have. It's how we measure employee performance as well. So it's really investing in the company as a whole. And I think for me, that is very, very important. And the way a company is run has to represent the philosophy, not only of myself as the founder, but I think of its management and of the board. And I can tell you from practical aspects, one of the things that you want to do is you always hear raves about companies that people want to work for. There's always this thing that if this company comes and asks you to work for them, you should take it in a heartbeat. I know traditionally that's been government and certain private sector. There was a period in time where being a banker was an amazing career choice. The way we like to think of it as management is think of it when with our own company. Is .com Zambia a great place to work? So yes, we have expectations of employees, but even for us as management, it's also thinking about how do we get the best employees and how do we get the best out of them? How are we thinking about performance? Not only from an OKR perspective, an objectives perspective, but even individual development plan. And I think for the employees that are on the call, I'm sure they're probably nodding their heads because they're seeing a lot of that occur. But it's also having a company that I personally feel represented its cares for its employees. That is why you saw, when I'm asked the question, why did you have an employee stock option plan where over 860,000 kwacha worth of shares were given to employees? For me, the answer was simple. Make them a part of the success. If they own a part of the company, they have a vested interest in the company doing well, so that even when I am giving this presentation, they are a part of it as well. We need to move towards that mindset. There are also some philosophical mindsets that exist in .com Zambia, and I don't want to go too much into them, but one of the things when employees come and work at .com Zambia, one of the things that they quickly realize is, as management, we care more about productivity output. We don't mind, it's not about, did you come in at 8 hours today and did you leave at 17? No, if traffic is heavy, come in at 9, start work at 10, leave at 16. Do you need to leave an hour to pick up your children if you have a school run? Do all of that as long as you get the work done. And I think that's really just a bit of an insight into how we are thinking about our organization. And some of the biggest growth that we have seen in those sort of 32 employees is we've seen a lot of growth in our IT department. We are an IT company. We're thinking about new product development. That is important to us. We've seen also growth in new offices, like our finance office. Being a public company, we've got fiduciary responsibilities. That department has grown. We've also expanded our sales team. And that is where because we have to grow, we have to get new clients, and we have to think about how we're going to sell future products as well. And I think that is where we've seen the growth when it comes to staffing. And then the other one, strengthening the foundation, is protect and grow the Ito business. And for me, this is really about, and I think I see this quite a bit when people say, oh, I've invested in .com. They come back to me and say, but people are saying that .com, they have a tender. If government changes hands, it will go out of business. And I think what I want to do is I just want to explain what protecting and growing the Ito business, what this actually means from a practical perspective. First and foremost, the first misconception I would like to perhaps address is our position in the Ito industry is not a result of a government tender. Okay, the Ito business is actually a competitive multi-operator market. And let's move away from Itos. What I want all of you right now to think of is think about how you can buy Zesco units right now. Think about how many different ways you can do it and start naming them in your head. You could probably come up with, hey, look, I could probably do it with my mobile, with my bank app. I could probably do it by going to the convenience store. I could go to a Zesco office. I could go online and find another portal. And what I'm explaining to you is world government and companies have what's called extended service delivery. This is where you want to provide a service to the general public. And what you do is you invite parties to say, can you help us do that? So when you buy Zesco units, for example, yes, that money is done through is for Zesco, but it's probably being done by some third party, whoever it is that you pick, that is in charge of service delivery. We operate in the same type of setup, and there are actually over 16 parties that do the business that we do. Everyone from Stanbic Pay to Airtel Money to MTN, all of this. What happens is, and even now you can think of it yourself. Okay, I want to pay my tolls electronically. How am I going to do it? The answer to that is you have multiple choices in which you can do it. And you also have the option to pay by cash. So the question should always be, what have we done to become a leader in that space? Why is it that Zambeef? Why has Miloto Transport? Why has ShopRite? Why has Zalawi? Why have those particular corporate entities, why have they made Com Zambia their e-toll manager? Why have they gone to them? And a lot of that comes down to the back office infrastructure that we have, the date, what we're able to do with the data. And I could tell you, be very open in telling you that one of the reasons why we can compete effectively is how good we are in converting toll data into usable intelligence for our fleet companies. Okay? And also just even responsible customer service. That is, for me, is a big philosophy of mine. This is why we also do investor calls as well. Because for me, never take for granted, especially as an SME, as a Zambian-run organization, always remember that never take for granted your position. And we also have to think of, why is our product better than all the other options that client have, such that when our sales team can go to a new client, they have to explain to them that, oh, you're using cash. This is why .com is better for you. This is what it can do for you. Oh, you're using that party to pay for your tolls. This is why we are better. And this is effectively how the e-toll business works. So I wish it was a government tender. I wish it was, sometimes it was a 10-year fixed agreement, but it actually does not work like that. It's not something that we sit on our laurels. We have to work hard to defend our position, and we always have to think about how we are making it better. So one aspect we do talk about is how we're improving as an organization. But the other thing is also, how do we continue to grow our position in the e-toll industry, and how do we continue to be the best in class? And I think one of the things that we are thinking about today is, how do we make our platform better? Now, there are a lot of boring technical things that are happening behind the scenes around how we run our infrastructure. It's things about making our platform, because actually, for people that sort of understand tech and understand data, we started our e-toll business in 2017. That means that we have certain clients, we have 8 years of their transaction data sitting there. And anyone who knows systems means that sometimes you get slowdowns, you have to make it more reliable. How is it that when you open your account, everything's going to pop up quickly? So there is a lot of technical stuff behind the scenes that are happening to make our platform even better and even more robust. But we are also thinking about, how do we make it better for the client experience? I know one of the big changes we're making is, I know very soon we'll be introducing what we call e-toll Plus with AI. This means that if you are one of our clients and you log in and you've done 5,000 transactions that day, looking at 5,000 toll transactions is a pain. How do we change that to usable intelligence? We already do that. And now we're taking it to the next level with AI, where you can go in and prompt and say, hey, look, show me the vehicle that is using the most tolls. Show me my average over the last 1 week. That is what we are moving to, where we can go out to the world and say, we are the leader in this industry and we will continue to lead. And I think that's the one thing. And I remember at a board meeting, I gave the analogy that we are like a landlord. Our landlord is the e-toll business. And in that apartment or unit, we've got 300 tenants. And we want to charge them, and we charge them rent for that service. But let us not be that landlord that just sits there and say, let's collect the money without actually making any improvements to the property that we have. And I think that is the metaphor I would like all of you to sort of remember when you think about our toll business. And so sometimes when people say, oh, but government but if government changes, the toll business will go away. I think the way to think about that particular question is third-party distribution is how modern economies work, not only for government, but for private sector-driven companies as well. So what are those people saying? And you can go back to them and you can challenge them on this point. Are you saying that all this distribution network that government has set up, whether it's how they collect RATSA fees, how they collect taxes, are you saying that they're going to eliminate the private sector participation in that type of service delivery? Or are you saying that they're going to turn around and make a law that prevents .com Zambia from participating in service? And what you always have to remember is what the platforms that our client use belong to us. We're the ones that created the service delivery and how we deliver that service. So I just thought it was very important to touch on that, because the one thing that we will not do going forward is we will not shy away from saying that we've done well in our e-toll business and we've worked very hard to get to the position that we are in. And we do want to grow. And the reason we want to grow is because we are in a position where we can go after bigger market opportunities, because the tolling business is about a 7 billion kwacha opportunity. And of that, I think this year, we're projected to do about 850, 900 million. Chilufya, I would just say you're very... Anyway, I would have loved it if you went up there and declared that we're going to exceed the billion. But at some point, we will exceed 1 billion kwacha annually in our e-toll business. And also what you have to remember is that tolling is now divided between government and private operators. So the roads are owned in part by private parties for the next 25 years. And we work with those private parties. Some of them are running our systems to run their electronic tolling system. And I think, as Chilufya alluded to, there's a new toll plaza coming up in the next quarter. That will be in Kabwe. Actually, I was just told the name last week. It will be the Godfrey Mianda Toll Plaza. That, for a company like ours, that means that is significant volume growth, significant revenue growth. And that is sort of where our numbers are coming from when we say that we can grow the e-toll business. It's a combination of what we can do from a sales perspective to acquire more customers. It's a combination of taking advantage of external factors, like in the national budget, the toll prices being increased. It's also new developments like a new toll plaza that was not part of our revenue stream coming online. And if you go to our annual report or to our financial, our audited financials, it actually breaks down the revenue. What component is the NRFA? This means all toll plazas run by the National Road Fund Agency. There's also toll revenue run by MOIC, which is a consortium that runs that is constructing the dual carriageway. And there is also a TKC, that's the toll plaza that is running the Konkola toll plaza, the one by Kasumbalesa. I also know behind the scenes that we're in conversations with 2 other consortiums. These are new consortiums. I think the one that is on the Indola going to the Sakanya border, I think that's run by a private party called Jaswin Port. We're in talks with them, and that is how the toll industry sort of works. So I just thought it was very important, as shareholders, let's understand, the business that you own. How does it work? What drives it? What are the risks? Yes, could any business has risk, but I think it's important to understand the context of the environment that we operate in. And one of the things we always have to be aware of is that when someone wants to make a payment electronically, they can do it by cash. They can do it through 16 other methodologies. Our job is to make sure that they pick .com Zambia. And to do that, we have to continue investing in our infrastructure. So I just thought strategically this was very important to cover. The next slide is actually not as intense because I can't go into the details around it, but I think one of the things we want to do is we want to grow with intentions. And I think this year we've committed to bringing 2 new products onto the market. And I think the beautiful thing about the position that we are in is, as a company, we have what's called operating leverage. Think about the profitability numbers that were shared earlier by the Chief Financial and Operating Officer. We are already profitable. I think we're generating over 1 million kwacha in profit every month. And we've got cash from the IPO. This is something that's going to continue to grow. So how does new products work in a company like ours? If someone offered me 50 million kwacha today, it actually wouldn't change anything. If we raised 50 million kwacha, someone came to us and says, here's 50 million kwacha, it actually would not change anything in terms of how we want to grow organically. And please note that word that I'm using, organically, because the two solutions we are focused on are products that we are developing as a company. And with a tech company like ours, when you're developing a new product, it's not capital that solves that problem. First and foremost, it's the technical know-how. That's why we're growing our IT team. That's why I am brought in to say, can you design this product? Does that require a new cost? No, that's already covered in our existing operating cost. Well, what about distribution? Because when you start a business, one of the biggest questions you have to ask is, who am I going to sell this to? We have over 300 relationships. If we're going to sell a product to parties, especially in the enterprise space, we go and speak to the existing relationships we already have. That is how we grow. You don't need capital to do that. You don't need a huge marketing budget to do that. Well, what about intellectual property? Well, intellectual property is what we are paid to do as a company. And so that is why I'm emphasizing that growth in our company, it's to grow with intention. And one of the things we don't want to fall trap to is people come and say, oh, no, you got to grow, you got to diversify. And we stop focusing on what has put us in the position financially to do that, which is e-tolls. We need to take advantage of that, take that position and grow on top of it. And that is strategically what we are looking at. And so we are looking later in the year to introduce an enterprise solution. This is something in the enterprise space. I think in our annual report, we've talked about how we are waiting for Bank of Zambia licensing that would give us a payment license. Some of the initiatives we are working on do require a payment license, but we have started testing them. And one of the beautiful things about the IPO, and this was something that we emphasized in the prospectus quite a bit. So those of you that have time and are interested in it, go back and read the prospectus. A number of times I mentioned that I would love our clients to become shareholders. And the reason I did that was for them to not only have a vested interest in what we do, but for us to be together in how we grow. And over 20 of them came forward. And what that means for us from a growth perspective is the way we design product is being led by our clients. They're the ones telling us that, hey, look, this is what we need. I have 600 trucks. I have 700 employees. This is what I'm struggling with. Can you help? We speak to them. We speak to one of the others. Do you have the same problem as this customer? Great. That is when we go back to our board and they now define and say, yes, I think we believe there is a strong business case for that product. Go ahead and design it. And so there is something we are working on in the enterprise space. The other is in the fuel industry as well. I mentioned that tolling is 7 billion. The fuel industry is 60 billion as well. And there is a solution we are working on in that space as well. And a lot of that focus will be on everyday users, including you, our shareholders. If I introduce a fuel product and I know that I now have 1,600 shareholders, surely if you own the company and I say, if you happen to own a car or a vehicle and you own this company, support it. That is how that is done. And I think that is how we think about products. Unfortunately, I can't get into the details of just what we're designing. A lot of it is for competitive reasons, just for proprietary reasons. But I think what you need to hold us to is, as a company, we're saying strategically, we're going to improve on our e-toll business. We're going to improve our internal operations. And we're going to launch 2 new products before the year is done, which will shape us into a very strong 2027 if we do everything correctly. And I think that is the intermediate strategy. And if we execute on that and profits grow, our revenues grow, that is when you now start to see, all things being equal, that is when you start to see, you start to see value in your investment. I think for many people who joined us just after the IPO, I talked about the road to $1 billion. How do we get our share price to 100 kwacha per share? I think right now it's trading at 22 kwacha. How do we get it to 100 kwacha per share? That is a function of executing the strategies that we just talked about, that I just talked about. How do we grow as a company? How do we break out from being this small tech company to this large entity that all of you expect of us? But to do that, we also have to make sure that our house is in order, how we are staffed up, what sort of systems. But I think you can rest assured that we are a very lean company. We're a very efficient company. And because we understand what you've asked of us, and the fact that a lot of people are going to be looking at us and judging us and saying, if this company does well, then everyone will do well. And we do not take that responsibility certainly lightly. And I think that is where we are heading as a company. And all I can say to all of you on the call who are shareholders of the company, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do this. And while the outcome is never guaranteed, what I can guarantee is I think you have the best effort of myself, the best effort of my executive leadership, our senior leaders, the board, to try and make this happen. And I think on that note, I did say that technically I could have explained this in a minute, but I thought it was very important for me to add color to what we are doing as a company. And I will add that personally, I am the founder of Com Zambia, but I think in the company's entire history, this must probably be the most exciting time for our organization. And a lot of it is because of the energy, the momentum, and the opportunities that we do have. And one of the things that I will not touch upon is when we execute this intermediate strategy, there are things we can do long term. We can raise capital and say, because one of the interesting things that's been happening over the last couple of months is the number of entities that have come forward saying, can you buy my business? And those will represent opportunities. We're also getting, I'm not quite sure who was on the call, but I remember we got a proposal yesterday from a company saying, hey, look, this is the business that we do in 5 countries, but we've never been able to do it in Zambia. How can we partner to help? And opportunities like that will come along. But for right now, our intermediate focus is taking care of ourselves as an organization, growing the Ito business, and also expanding on what we call our organic growth. These are products that we own, and we are certainly working on at least 2 initiatives that will come online during the course of the year. Thank you so much. I think, Sanga, that is really the end of my prepared remarks.
Thank you for that, Moano. I think that was really informative, and this is why we're all here, so people can get a deeper look into Com Zambia. What are we doing? What are we trying to do? Where do we want the company to go? How are we trying to grow value for you, the shareholders? And those of you who aren't shareholders yet, why do we want you to come invest in the company? And I think that presentation by our managing director really, really outlines that pretty well. So yeah, quite a few questions have come in, and understandably, a lot of them are about strategy and what the company is trying to do. So, Moano, I'll pose a couple of questions to you. First, a pretty interesting one based on recent events. What potential opportunities do you see possibly arising out of the latest policy pronouncement of moving the country towards the 24-hour economy? And in the light of that, how do you hope to position Com Zambia to fully tap into these opportunities? And secondly, also just ask, this is another question from Brilliant Muyenda. How, as a pure tech pioneer on the Luce, how are you protecting your intellectual property from larger regional fintech players entering the Zambian market?
Wow, those are good questions. Okay, so the 24-hour economy is an interesting one. I don't think it changes anything fundamentally in terms of what we do. The way our philosophy as a company, the way we approach things is we always look to say, where can we add value? Where is there an inefficient process? And And once you sort of identify that, how can we as a business capitalize on that? What the 24-hour economy will do is it will sort of add tools that will allow company, that will get companies asking questions. How can we operate more efficiently? And if those answers are in our wheelhouse, those things will ultimately help us. Now, there are some direct things that have been in the news that could help, and maybe with the 24-hour economy, here's perhaps one thing that could be of direct benefit. Right now, most of our clients on the electronic tolling space we run mainly enterprise accounts. I am not sure yet if that 24-hour pronouncement also includes road transportation. And the reason I say that is because right now, commercial vehicles have to stop moving at 21 hours. I do know that strategically, when the dual carriageway is done, they are going to lift that. And I have been, with policymakers, one of the things that they sort of, I know they're looking at is, since they did the nighttime ban, has it actually fundamentally changed anything? But I do know when the dual carriageway comes in and there's a move to 24-hour economy, that will mean that even vehicles and transportation and commercial good movements will become 24 hours. If that happens, yeah, then certainly. And that's actually a really good question because I'm thinking about it on the spot. And something like that would actually help us grow. And even a more recent example was, for those of you who are following other listed examples, Puma, they announced their financial results for the year. And I think they took almost a 500,000 kwacha loss. And if you start looking at their annual reports, why is that occurring? Some of it is because of the competitive environment. In fact, if many of you think about it now, I know in my road, there only used to be 2 filling stations on a 5-kilometer stretch of my road. Now there are about 6 of them. And in my mind, I'm thinking that is crazy. Now, remember what I've just indicated, that we are moving into the fuel space. What that means from an opportunity perspective is when we launch our new fuel product, and especially with the capital that we have, the way we're thinking about it is we're able to go to an OMC and say, hey, look, this is the value add we think we can add to the industry. Can we work together? And if we do, we can help you generate more revenue. And if the industry trend and how competitive it is anything to go by, the answer we should get is, we need all the help we can get to drive our revenue. And if we can partner with a trusted company like .com and they can bring us more business, that actually creates opportunities. Because in the past, we've struggled with the OMCs a little bit, but that would also be how the external environment and how we look at the external environment and how it can help us. The intellectual property question one is a good one. And so in technology, there is no such thing as owning a process. In fact, it's very rare for a technology company to file a patent. And what I mean by that is you cannot own the process of doing something. You cannot own the process of electronic payments. You cannot own the process of buying a bus ticket. You cannot own the process of online shopping. That is actually a common fact in our industry. And for those that do, even if you said, let me patent something, what you can patent is the code you use to create that process. But in technology, there are hundreds of different codes, hundreds of different ways of doing it. So the way in which you compete is effectively by being the best at it. That is why I wanted to emphasize earlier on that, yes, part of why we are good at the tolling business is we have great technology. Technology that adds real value to our clients. And our job is to make it hard for the next person to replicate. So if someone wanted to enter the tolling business, what would it take? What would it really take them? How much would they have to spend on infrastructure and technology that we've been developing and spending on and investing in for the past 8 years? What would it take for them to take away relationships that we've had for the past 8 years? Not to mention that now some of those are our shareholders. So I think whenever we launch a new what you always have to remember is the value of any intellectual property is how you can use it to generate revenue. We could become we could today, we have great guys in technology. I could tell them today, build a social media platform. We could do that. we're on salary, so there'll be no cost to it. But strategically, can we displace Facebook as the social media that people come to? No, but it's not something that we want to. We want to focus on what we are good at. When we think about expanding, it's building off what we already have. And I think that's the way to look at it. So the example that I gave with Facebook, just as a very random example, what we want to do is whenever we enter into a new area or even in our existing electronic tolling, we want competitors to look at that and say the gap to get to where they are is too big. We're not even going to attempt it. And so even when we think about what we're going to do with expanding our product, we have to make sure that what we're going to do is different and it has real value add. And and that's how we've been approaching it.
Thank you for that, Mano. Well said. Got a few interesting questions here from Shadrach, who's asked 3 questions. Firstly, as the team has nearly tripled in size, what are the primary challenges in maintaining the startup execution culture while implementing the more rigid governance of a listed company? Secondly, how does the company plan to leverage its client coalition of transport operators to cross-sell new digital payment or logistics products? And the last question he asks is, what is the timeline for the deployment of the remaining IPO proceeds, specifically earmarked for infrastructure and product development?
No, great question. Let me try and be a little bit quicker so we can try and address more questions. So look, I think in terms of an organization, first and foremost, I think I probably have to make the correction. We are a small company, but I think we're not a startup anymore. Don't forget, I think Com Zambia started in 2009. We got our venture capital funding almost 11 years ago. I think we're a small cap company, but we're certainly not a startup. And what we have to think about, especially in our next level of growth, is how do we manage ourselves effectively? But I think for me, that's more of a philosophical question. And for me, the philosophy is what I call balancing the best of both worlds. I've been in very large organizations that have very rigid standard operating procedures. We have to balance that out. So we have to think about how are we efficient, but how are we also human? So I like to, and I think the board love to say this. One of the things that they like about us is that we have governance, we have policies, we have procedures, but we're also not rigid. We're not, we can act very quickly. If a decision needs to be made, and I think we've seen this happen, it can happen relatively quickly because we don't have to go through layers. And I think part of it is being able to balance that with how do you have the best. And that is why the best example I could give is, look, do I need people to sign in at 8 hours and then leave at 17 so that we know they did 42 hours? No. But we do need for them to sort of log in and do end of day sort of productivity logs. We do have to sit down and say, what are your objectives for the year? And that is how we balance it out. So on one hand, you're giving flexibility, but to manage that flexibility, you're setting expectations as well. In terms of the client shareholders, that is actually a very great question, because a big part of why we went public was for us to be able to talk to our existing clients and tell them, become shareholders of .com. And I think in the annual report, Miloto Transport, remember that as shareholders, generally, you keep that information private. So we had to get their permission to say, look, we have this coalition, but we need to explain to people who's in this coalition. Miloto Transport, Roxy Transport, they're a part, and about 18 others. And what's happening with them is they know what new products we are working on. It's not public, but the way the product development lifecycle works is we say, this is the initiative that we are thinking about. Will it add value? And the first thing we got from all of them is, great, yes, it will. Okay. Then what we have to do is we have to start testing it. And that is actually the phase that we are in now, where we're building it, we're testing it very low key. But outside of that, there are also regulatory considerations to be done as well. We need our Bank of Zambia licensing. But what that does is it gives us what's called guaranteed offtake. It means that when I launch this new product, I already know that there are 20 parties who will use that product, and them alone can can give a sizable volume. And I remember and here's the size of, just to add context to this. Remember what Chilufya indicated, that we are a high volume, low margin company. That's any financial technology company. So let's say we introduce this new product and we can get 1 billion kwacha in utilization. Okay, we could do that through our own existing relationships. And if we do that, the revenue we would make per 1 billion would be anywhere from 10 million kwacha to 50 million. Remember, 10 million kwacha is 1% of a billion. That is how we are thinking about sort of the next stage. But the challenge and the question that investors should have is, okay, great, they're now in this space and it's a much larger industry, 400, but we don't want 1 billion. Okay, tolling, they're doing okay, because if they're at 1 billion of what is a 5 billion, 6 billion industry, they're okay. But if the industry is 400, 500 billion, what are they going to do to get us more than a billion? I think that's what's exciting for us. And look, and I think in terms of the IPO timeline, there's no timeline on when certain factors will be used, because cash movement is a variable. Remember what I just said, that we've got the IPO money, we've got the IPO funds, and we have started deploying them. And maybe Chilufya, you can come on to explain, unless you think I cover it. But what has happened is we have the IPO funds and we have what we've earmarked the IPO funds towards. Some of those are relatively straightforward. Others, it's not quite as straightforward. And the other variable we have is that we also have a core business that's adding 1 million in cash to the business, more than 1 million kwacha every month to the business as well. So all of that commingled just means that we're in a very healthy cash financial position. And so it's not a race to spend the IPO money. In fact, if anything, the right phrase I would use is we have what's called a war chest. It means we have funds sitting there. And when we are ready to execute on certain things, we can do it knowing that we're in a healthy financial position to do it. And I think that's what ultimately it ultimately means. Even though we are going to spend a bit of money, because if you're going to test the product for 6 months, you're going to go through regulatory, you're going to make concessions. There is a cost to doing it, but we have to keep that cost in perspective.
Thanks for that one. I think those were some very interesting questions, and you did address each of them quite well. We do have a question which I would direct to Chilufya, our Chief Financial and Operations Officer here. Nobo Kasonde here asks, with the company now debt-free post-IPO, how are you prioritizing capital allocation between dividends, reinvestment, and potential expansion? And what should shareholders expect in terms of returns? Chilufya, maybe you can speak to that.
Right, Sanga, thanks for that question. I think maybe Noble has just joined the presentation late, but we did mention earlier that in the annual report, the dividend policy has actually been determined. And so it's basically looking at the net profit after tax, and between 10 to 50% of that is where our policy sits. However, this is also going to be dependent on where our cash flows are sitting and what current projects we have in the business. So if you remember the MD slide that came previously, there are a couple of projects that we are running. And so currently, yes, we are using IPO funds to take those projects to the next level. So without saying too much, it really is dependent on where we are with our projects, where we are with our profitability as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and ultimately as well, this session is more to speak with myself and Chilufya as the executive, a sort of executive representation. But the AGM is next week. And if you are a shareholder, these are the questions that you have with the board of directors, with the chairman. I know he's on the call, he's listening. I'm sure if he goes to the Q&A, I'm sure he sees some questions around dividends as well. Those are ultimately done at the board of directors, because they are the ones who determine the dividend policy and what the dividend payout. And remember that the board of directors represent you as shareholders. And so while we might have views, all we can do is guide you on what the policy might be. But ultimately, the parties that make that determination is the board of directors based on the factors that Chilufya highlighted.
Thanks for for that, Chiluk and Mano. Yes, obviously dividends will be a hot topic among shareholders. And just based on the questions that keep coming, I will echo what the CFO and the MD have said here. So you can find the dividends policy in the annual report, which is again available on our website at www.comzambia.com. And again, for shareholders, the Com Zambia's AGM is next week, Wednesday. Registration is still available. You can find the link to register to attend, whether physically or virtually, at our website, again, www.comzambia.com. So please come through and raise those questions directly to the board, like Mano has suggested. So now a question for you, Mano. You mentioned you're working on a payment license with Bank of Zambia. What's the immediate to long-term strategy on that? And also, is there a long-term strategy to take the e-tolling business to neighboring countries who have a similar road infrastructure system of tolling as Zambia?
Thank you so much. So I think the way to explain the context around this is we operate in the electronic tolling business, and we also do some work in the fuel business. Those businesses do not require payment licenses. The reason they do not require payment licenses is they're what's called closed-end payment systems. If you go to a store and you buy a store card, those do not require payment licenses. But once you want to expand the type of solutions that you are offering and how those payment solutions work, that is where payment licenses do come in. And once you're sort of in that space, they actually open up the opportunity, the wider opportunities that you can pursue. And that is actually our plan. And so when we speak about regional sort of expansion, absolutely what you've indicated is in the table. But what I will hint at is that it's not only tolling, it could be a number of solutions, where if there's a solution and the payment requires something to be done in South Africa, we want to be there. What we have to focus on is making sure that that solution we have actually has true value, and it's better than existing solutions that are out there. And we can go to an organization and we can explain to them that this is how this will either save you money, or this is how it will be more efficient. This is how it will add the following to your organization. And I think that's how we look at, that's how we are sort of looking at the future roadmap. And hopefully that is something that is done by the third quarter. By mid-year, we hope to have at least the regulatory aspect of our growth plan completed.
Thank you for that, Mano. Can see the questions are still coming through. So you have spoken on cross-border business, basically. Back to the incorporation of AI, which has been asked on again. Can you please expand on how AI will play a role in the enterprise solutions? Has this been included in guidance revenue, and would this come at higher margins?
Okay. Great. No. All right. So the AI and the work we're doing, it does not actually increase our margins. Remember what I indicated in my core is that when someone wants to make a payment electronically at the toll plazas, there are 16 or more ways that they can do it, including cash. So the way in which we have to do it is we have to ensure that the way in which we do it is better than anyone else's. And looking at how AI, the AI conversation for us is twofold. So no, it does not increase our revenue outlook, but it gives us a better product to sell. So there are intangible advantages. But the primary goal for us for AI and how we use AI currently with our electronic tolling business is twofold. One of them is we're using it internally for operations as well. Remember that we are doing quite a sizable volume of transactions. Sang, I think you would know the number better than I am as a business analyst. How many tolling transactions are we doing a month? Is it 160,000?
Per month?
Yeah, per month, yes.
Yes, it usually ranges between 160 to 170,000 a month.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So think about this as an individual. If I gave you a spreadsheet and it had 170,000 transactions, How are you supposed to sort that into data? And that is what we do. So what we're saying is we do about 160 to 180,000 in transaction. That translates to about 65 to 70 million in revenue currently, at least, in the last financial sector. And what we're doing with AI is, because you have that volume of transactions, is you're using it to basically run your organization more efficiently. How do you make heads and tails of that data? And the biggest uses we're doing is in what we call basically security. You're dealing with financial transactions, fraud could occur. How are you detecting such incidents? That's a big one. We're also doing it for what we call basically planning and projections and operational intelligence. Those are things that the general public would not see, but operationally they do exist. But what we talked about is we want our clients to have the best tolling platform that they can. And there are things that you could do that they would not see. It's kind of like that analogy, Ish, unfortunately. I'm going to share this analogy, even though it's a terrible analogy. But how many of you go home, turn on the lights turn on? How many of you call Zesco and thank them for giving you electricity? That's why I say it's a bit of a bad example. So that's why I'm saying that there are a lot of things that make our platform work that our clients would not recognize. They just know that they go on and it's working. When there's a fault, they will let us know. But what we also have to think about is, how do we make it better? So that in a couple of weeks, when they log on, they're going to see this eToll Plus with AI, and it's got these tools that will make their experience with us better. So what that doesn't do is it doesn't drive immediate revenue. But what we hope is that it helps us continue to retain clients, and it helps us attract newer clients. And because it's a differentiator, this is something that we can go on the news. We can start running adverts and start saying, Com Zambia runs an eToll platform with AI Plus, and we can showcase how great it is. And by doing that, we can hopefully acquire more clients that will help us get to that 850, 900 million kwacha projection that Chilufya indicated. And so that's how we looked at AI.
Thank you for that, Mono. And I mean, as a tech company, of course, something like AI is something we can't ignore. And I think shareholders and investors alike would be happy to see that it's something we're embracing and incorporating into our core business. So a couple of questions that I'll just combine into one, mainly from a shareholder's point of view. Can you explain the advantages or benefits minority shareholders have, especially in terms of decision makings or any protections they might receive, since the dividends question has already been answered? Yeah, so advantages or benefits for shareholders.
Okay. All right, I'll address sort of both. What I would say is the dividend questions, I think there was one about earnings per share. If you go onto the Lusaka Securities Exchange website, there are what you call abridged financial statements. Some of those numbers are there. So, for example, it talks about our earnings per share for 2025 being 0.6 ingwe. In 2025, up from 0.42 ingwe over from 2024. So there has been an improvement in earnings per share. And again, what I will reiterate is, I think dividend questions, those are sort of for the AGM next week. And the question that was asked is very similar. That's really a preamble to the AGM next week. So look, the way voting rights work is when you are a shareholder in a company, you own the company, and that share does give you a voice in that company. However, there are practical aspects to that. The number of shares that you own determine what voting rights look like, how decisions can be made, and those are some of the technical aspects that will be covered next week. So, for example, if we bring a motion to say we would like to nominate a director to the board, you need 50% of shareholders to vote in the affirmative for that motion. What your shares allow you to do is, how can your shares contribute to that vote? And the reality of the situation is, obviously, larger shareholders, larger investors have a more influential position at it. But the reason you have AGMs and the reason why only shareholders can attend AGMs is because as long as you are a shareholder, you have a voice. So even if a particular, so if you have a voice, similar to how you are speaking now sort of online, you are allowed to come to those AGM, address the board of directors, be asked to be given a platform to speak. And when you're given that platform to speak, you may give your opinion on how your company is run, you'd like to see differently, and it will be taken under advisement. But also think of a public limited company as a democracy, if you will. Yes, your voice could be heard, and we have to give you the right and respect to hear your voice as a shareholder. And I think that is what you ultimately comes to technical decisions. And in terms of why you invest, very simply, those come down to the same thing. You invest in any company because you believe in that company, and by investing, you're looking for two things: for your shares to appreciate in value, or to get some sort of return through dividends. And I think the dividend conversation has been covered quite a bit.
Yes, thank you for that, Mono. And once again, I'd just like to thank you all for tuning in and taking time out of the day to join this Investor Day webinar. Thank you so much for the questions that have been coming in. It is past 16. We will be concluding soon, but please, you can send in your last questions as we approach the conclusion of this webinar. But a couple of questions that have come through, mostly about external factors. Do you have buffers in place for instabilities caused by outside markets and events? Example, things like wars and international politics. These especially affect the fuel industry. And are we taking advantage of any outside markets and events? Similarly, another question is, I wanted to know how you're handling three exposures, the three being exchange rate, regulatory changes, and technology disruption.
Great question. Look, the question itself you're asking is really around risk. And look, we as an organization, any business, risk planning is part of what you do. But risk planning is just an awareness of what could go wrong. And what could go wrong is anything, is both internal and external. And I think we were working on our risk policy, I think a week or two ago, if I'm not mistaken. I think Chilufya, as sort of the chief financial and operating officer, was working on that. But that is anything to be, how do we handle potential tech intrusions? What happens if our system crashes? That is how we look at things holistically. Now, you cannot eliminate risk 100%, but there are things you can do to improve sort of your prospects. So for example, the war chest that we have, we call it a war chest, it's the cash that we have sitting there. If you think about it, that is a certain amount of risk exposure, because it means that if certain things go wrong, we have the financial comfort to withstand those shocks, if you will. And I think that's how you have to look at it. Diversification as well. As much as we're saying electronic tolling is our core business, one of the ways in which we can manage risk is to look at diversification. Even though we might say from a risk perspective, how exposed are we on the electronic tolling side? We are, but just from a growth perspective, from a risk perspective, we do want some elements of diversification. And so our growth strategy, different products, especially what we call private sector driven products, is something that we do think about holistically when it comes to risk. And in terms of the three exposures, those are ultimately the same. The exchange rate exposure, we have very minimal exchange rate risk. That's because we're a Zambian business. Most of our expenditure is in kwacha. Our revenue base is in kwacha. So exchange rate exposure only happens, for example, certain services, we need to pay for them. We need to pay for them in dollars. That might affect us, but because we're not dependent on them, they're not as huge. Regulatory changes and technology disruptions are just part of our everyday risk management. The regulatory exposure changes all the time. If they change, for example, one of the big changes that's happening from a tech regulatory perspective is the tech and data management. If they're saying to us that you need to have your data physically in Zambia, what does that mean from a policy perspective? We need to think about that. Technology disruption is us just thinking about business continuity. If our system crashed today, how do we continue operating? There's a very long-winded answer to how that is done. But I think what I just want to share, I think the bottom line is, as management and as an organization, you always have to be thinking about what your risk exposure is, what could impact you, and what you your potential solutions to some of these risks might look like. And you always have to be prepared for shocks, and we certainly always are.
Thank you again for that, Mono. Seems like we are closing up our questions. So the last two questions that we have here. First, Frederick asks, "Hi CEO, would you explain more on EPAS and how it works?" And secondly, Agre asks, "In terms of liquidity and exit optionality, when does the lockup period for initial shareholders expire?"
Let me start with the easy one from Agri. So the lockup that he's referring to, it doesn't work for initial shareholders. It's actually more for members, directors, people on the board of directors. That includes myself as the founder. It's basically, when are we allowed to sell our shares? And the Lusaka Stock Exchange has what's called a 2-year lockup rule. So ours will actually expire at the end of 2027, going into 2028. And what that rule says is that we are not allowed to sell all of our shares. And the reason they do that is, one, to ensure that, this is not a scheme for us to come onto the stock exchange, try and offload all of our shares and then, run away. And the other issue as well is that we are also privy to insider information as to what's happening within the company. So what they do is that they do put restrictions on the buying and selling of shares on our behalf. By the way, I worked in the securities industry. This was in New York. You do have very similar rules in other places. I worked in the investment management department, and one of the things that they would make us do is, whenever we wanted to buy or sell shares, even in our own personal account, we had to go to the legal team and compliance and actually get authorization to do that trading, because what they didn't want is they didn't want us acting on insider information that we knew. So if we knew that an investment for $500 million, for example, was going to be made in a week or two, they wanted to make sure that we didn't act on that information. So it's a very similar type of setup. But to answer your question, the rule completely goes away in 2028, but it's only limited to shareholders who are directors, and most of them were initial investors. So you are correct. And the second one is around EPAS. Should I be explaining this or give the floor? I'm starting to feel a little bit left out. I think Chilufya has done such a great job in explaining the numbers that the focus tends to be on where we are going as a company, which actually does make sense. What's the quick way to explain EPAS in a minute or less? So we have an application, a mobile app that we call EPAS. And I think the way to explain it, maybe to make it sort of investor friendly, the way to explain it is, our electronic tolling business is what we call enterprise. That means that our clients are large companies that do lots of volumes, and there is a way in which we manage them. So the question becomes, what are you doing for you and me? And we do have shareholders who ask that question, that I own shares in Com Zambia, and I want to support the business. How come I can't use the product? EPAS is that answer. We're putting together an app where different types of services are put in one place. And this is an app that is currently running. So if you wanted to do electronic tolling, you can actually go to the Play Store. You can go to iOS Store, and you can find this app called EPAS by Com Zambia, and that would actually allow you to have your Ito account managed by Com Zambia. And the objective here is to start adding more services. And the next service we will add is fuel. And that should actually drive up significant utilization of this product, especially if we do fuel the way that we've sort of planned on doing it. And and why fuel? Because when it comes to electronic tolling and what we call ordinary users, their volume usage is very low. Small vehicles pay 20 kwacha. I mean, even if I think about my own personal fuel usage, I've used the toll plaza in the last 6 months. I think I've used it once. So how much was that? 40 kwacha. That's very different from a truck that is paid, or a bus that is paid to be on the road every day. And in the case of trucks, they are paying everywhere from 350 kwacha to 1,700 kwacha per toll transaction. So we haven't seen, even though we've got about 3,000 users on that app, we haven't seen a lot of utilization because individual users only use toll plazas once in a while and pay that 20 kwacha fee. But when you start to add fuel, then you're going to see their utilization increase. Because even if I think about my own fuel usage, it's about 3,000 kwacha, 4,000 kwacha a month. There's more value there. What happens if we can get 5,000 people, 6,000 people to use our way of buying and paying for fuel? That is what ePass is about. And when you start to build that ecosystem, then you start asking, what other value can we add? And if you build that ecosystem, that is what really our ePass application is about. That one we've named, we're sort of public about it, but what we're calling ePass 2.0 is one of the products that we intend to launch during the course of the year. And it's because we want to add the fuel component. And one of the beautiful things about being public is I will absolutely hound our shareholders to say, this is the product that we have. If you have a car, make sure you use it. And not only that, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. So, this thing of, it sort of reminds me of, this is why we went public, not, to say, guys, let's share together. I'm asking you because you own this company, but we're going to provide a good product, but it will help if you're the person that believes in it the most. And I think that's how we look at ePass. So I hope that answers that question. I was hoping to do an elevator pitch in a minute or less, but hopefully that explains ePass, which is actually ePass 2.0 is one of the products. So this is clearly someone who's been studying our company quite a bit, and that's actually a great question from a potential party that has really studied what our product lineup is looking like. So one of the products we're relaunching is ePass 2.0 by adding the fuel component.
That's very well said, Juan. And I think, just highlighting the importance of you, the shareholder, and you having a vested interest in Com Zambia, in our products, and in our success. It seems like the questions seem to have dried up now. So again, as we conclude, just thank you all once again for taking time to join into this webinar. I think webinars like this are important, not just for the shareholder, but for the company as well. Like Moana said, we're a public company now. It's so important for us to share with you, like Moana has shared, the direction of the company, where we're going, where we want to go, how you can play a part in that, but also to go back to Chilufia's presentation earlier, so that Com Zambia is a company that has been performing well. The numbers are great. Clearly the strategy is very promising, and there's a lot to be excited about Com Zambia. I think Moana keeps talking about the energy in the company being so high, and I think, I hope the shareholders, potential investors, anyone interested, I hope you can see that. I hope you can feel it. And thank you again all for joining in.
I think to Sango, what I might just add, make it some closing remarks. We want to be as transparent as possible. One of the things, when you make a declaration that you are going to go public, that means that you are going to run your company transparently. And what I would urge anyone on the call, even going forward, especially if you are a shareholder, if you have a question, it will be addressed. That's why we have an investor relations department. Sometimes, you can get caught up with what people might be saying online. And sometimes some of the calls we get is because of what someone has read online. And we then have to sort of set the record straight, if you will. If there's any clarification you need, that is what we are here for. For those of you who are shareholders, the AGM is next week. If you have a query, I want to find out about this, send an email or call or WhatsApp our investor relations department. They will get that answer for you, because that is ultimately what being public means. It means that you want to be accountable to the public, and you've we've made a pledge to run our company at the highest standards of governance, and it doesn't get any higher than the governance requirements of a public entity. And that is something that we do not take lightly. And this is why we do this. And this is why even next year we will perhaps do, this. I hope it's an annual event, not a biannual event, but hopefully, this is something that, every year, this is something that we will do. Give a chance to you as the public, as investors, shareholders, to come onto a forum like this, ask your questions, hear about the results, what we're thinking. And this is what allows you to come back at the end of the year and say, did this company do well or not? Did they do the things that they set out to do? And so I think for everyone that, that made time to join us on a Wednesday afternoon, I cannot again extend just how appreciative I am. And today was really about all of you, and from the questions and the fact that you've made me sweat a little, and shows that this is what this day is truly about. And it could not have happened without all of you. And again, I can only say thank you. And I think on those remarks, I think we can close out the meeting.
Yep. Thank you for that, Mono. Yes, so just a reminder, like Mono said, the AGM is next week. Shareholders are invited. You can register. You can find the link to register at our website, www.comzambia.com. And yes, on behalf of Moano, the MD and founder, Mr. Kaunda, the board chairperson, Ms. Yabe, the manager of communications and investor relations, and our CFOO, Ms. Chilufya, thank you all so much for coming. We hope you have a great evening and great remainder of the week. Thank you all.